Alright, hello. So I'm gonna do a quick little run through of the deck, go over some of the choices and stuff. So it starts off pretty straightforward. Your mana base is 8 blue fetches, the Flooded Strands and Scalding Tarns. You have 3 islands, 2 plains, and a mountain as your basics. 4 copies of Celestial Colonnade, 2 Tech Edges, and then some shocks. So pretty straightforward there. And then we have our one drop removal, which are 4 Path to Exile, 4 Lightning Bolt, and that's pretty standard as well. I mean, Lightning Bolt's really good, as is Path to Exile. And we are playing 4 copies of Lightning Helix, which is generally a little much, but we wanted to max out the life gain against like the Burn and Delver decks. And it also helps make gaps for your Geists to swing in through, which is really important in this deck. And we have the 3 copies of Kor Firewalker, which is a obvious concession to the popularity of Burn and Delver, especially online. I think they're still about, like, with Blue-Red Delver and Burn combined, are about 30% of the metagame. So it's pretty much like guaranteed that you're going to run into at least one over the course of any event you play. So just sort of hedging against those. Like in the other matchups, it's not great, but it's also not completely awful. In the blue-white-red mirror match, it's pretty good because it doesn't get bolted or helixed or electrolyzed. So that's pretty big. It can gain you some life. It also gains you life off of your own spells that you cast. So like your electrolyzes, helix, bolts all gain you life as well. They're also pretty good in Scapeshift, or against Scapeshift, at least in game 1, because if you can stay above 18 life, then they have to get up to 8 lands instead of 7 to Scapeshift you out, which usually is like enough. It's enough time to matter. I think like in a lot of those games, you get down to the point where you're one turn away from winning, and it comes down to whether to have the Scapeshift or not. But buying yourself an extra turn is a pretty big deal. As for counter spells, we have 3 Mana Leak, 4 Remand, and 4 Remands are really sweet. A lot of the times you just get to time walk your opponent. You get to take back their play and draw a card. Replaces itself. It is super sweet against Treasure Cruise because you remand it back to their hand and draw a card, and they lose all the cards in the graveyard. So that's a pretty big game for you. Mana Leak is like, it's not, I don't think, as strong as Remand right now, but it does permanently get rid of a threat, whereas Remand, it just goes back to their hand for them to replay it. So you kind of you get around some stuff with that. It's still a really strong card. It just is not as good in the late game, but hopefully with playing Geists, you are not getting to the point where like they're just completely dead, or you have an opportunity to use them while they're still alive. Then we have 4 Snapcaster Mage, which are sweet because gives you 4 extra copies of whatever burn spells are in your graveyard, so you can burn your opponent out. Actually, a pretty surprising amount of the time, you're able to just like snap back a bolt and attack for 2 the next turn, and that usually gets them dead. They're really good at closing out games. Snapping back anything is just insane, pretty much. Snapping back Remand is really good. And then we have Geist, which, that's pretty much self-explanatory. It's kind of the main aim of the deck is just to get some attacks in with Geist. And you have just piles of removal to make sure that happens. You want to kind of protect the Geist most of the time. And it's great if you can run him out early, but if you can't, it's also a pretty good top deck because it just, you can run him out with counterspell backup and just close out the game with him. Electrolyze is really good in this meta game as well. We're playing 3 copies, and it takes out a lot of the most popular cards right now. You can kill like a Voice of Resurgence, 2 mana dorks at a time, It kills an unflipped Delver, and another card it kills a flipped Delver on its own. It can pick off a Pyromancer or a Monastery Swift Spear in the right situations, and it draws you a card. So really, the Remands and Electrolyzes are pretty key because they keep your hand stocked up so you don't fall behind on card advantage. And like picking off 2 of their guys with 1 card. I mean, if you can get 2 guys, it's a 3-for-1 because you get 2 of their cards and you replace your own card. So that's pretty much insane. And then the last cards in the main deck are 2 Restoration Angel, which are really good at just closing games out on their own. If you can flash them down on your opponent's end step. Some counterspell backup. Really the only removal spell that gets them is Path to Exile. And it can just, you know, get in for 3 a turn, which is, it adds up pretty quickly with all the burn spells that you have in the deck. You can also Restoration Angel a Snapcaster Mage to buy back one of the spells in your graveyard, which is really good. And you can use it like, you can attack with the Geist, get the token, the Angel token attacking, and then when they block with their guy who would kill the Geist, you can flash in the Restoration Angel to save your Geist and attack in the next turn. So that can be a pretty big game as well. And then over in the sideboard we have 4 copies of Sanctimony, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's 1 and a white enchantment. Whenever an opponent taps a mountain for mana, you may gain 1 life. And you probably are able to guess what that is in there for. Burn and Blue-Red Delver both really get hit by it, especially because the majority of the time they don't really have any way to get rid of it once it's on the table. Outside of like Burn sometimes has like a Weird Hair in the sideboard or something like that, but that's really the only card that's going to be able to take it off the table. And against Burn, if you drop it turn 2, it's basically you've locked the game up right there. Delver, it's like not quite as good, but it's still pretty insane. And then Stony Silence is good against Affinity. I don't really like bringing it in against Pod because we just have so much removal that we're usually able to keep their guys off the table. And we have counter spells for the Pod, so it usually isn't worth bringing in the card. And maybe 1 if you really wanted it. Dispel and Negate come in like against other control decks. They're also really good against Burn. Against Blue-Red Delver, I usually like just bringing in Dispel. It's just a solid card. And then we have 2 Anger the Gods, which are really good against Pod because it gets rid of their voices and kitchen finks without having to 2-for-1 yourself. So that's a pretty big deal. They're also good against Delver. But usually against Delver, I usually just bring in the Volcanic Fallout because it can't be countered. So that's obviously a really big deal, and it kills all of their creatures. Outside of like Swift Spear if they cast a spell in response or something. I also like bringing in Volcanic Fallout against Affinity because it can hit their main lands, their Inkmoth and Blinkmoth Nexuses, when they activate them at instant speed. So that can be a pretty big deal if you can like take out 2 of their lands or something. And then we have 2 Molten Rains, which we use against Blue-White-Red control and against Scapeshift. Scapeshift, they're obviously really good. Blue-White-Red, they're also really good. The biggest thing you can do there is kill one of their Celestial Colonnades, because especially like with the slower versions, the more controlling versions with like Cryptic Command and stuff, they usually are only going to be killing you with Celestial Colonnades, or like that's their easiest way for them to kill you. And if you can cut them off, 1 or 2 of those, that's a pretty big beating. And then we have 1 copy of Hide Seek, which we are only going to be able to cast Hide on that side. And I started playing this over Weird Hair because it has the ability to deal with a Keranos once it's on the field. Whereas since it's indestructible, you can like Weird Hair it or something along those lines. And it's been pretty good so far. I don't think I've ever really been, man, I really wanted a Weird Hair here. So I've been pretty big on that one. I guess the only real downside is that they could possibly, like, if they shuffle the library, they could redraw the card that you hit with it. But I think that's pretty negligible. And then to round it out, we have one copy of Vedalken Shackles, and this is really primarily for the pod matchups because, you know, just taking their creatures is pretty sweet. And really, once you have active Shackles, it can really take over the game because they can't attack at all, really, because you're just going to take one of their guys, chump block. So every time they attack, they're losing at least one of their creatures, and it's just a really powerful card, hard to beat. And it also is good against the control decks that have like Snapcasters and Restos, because obviously they're pretty light on win conditions, and if you can take one of their win conditions, you are in pretty good shape. So that is the deck, and I guess we'll take it through an 8-man here in a few minutes, so check it out.